If people tuned in last night to the subscriber exclusive on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and saw our episode of More Pain, you would have heard effusive praise and hopeful promise that Michael Moore has for John Durham, the U.S. attorney who's just been appointed to investigate the etymology of the Russia investigation. But tonight, I have joining us again, good friend of the show and perhaps the sharpest dressed lawyer in the United States. Not only that, Larry Klayman, I don't mean to diminish the great work that he's done. Larry, wonderful to have you again.
Thank you, Jason. At least I'm wearing a coat and tie. Some of my colleagues come on cheer sports shirts.
Right. I apologize. I'm wearing a T-shirt, but I try to keep it casual here. And of course, Larry, you're taking on some of the most powerful agencies in the world and winning, as in the case of Dr. Corsi. You've challenged Robert Mueller, and we're going to talk tonight about John Durham, a U.S. attorney who you've told me you don't have the high hopes that some other people have had for him.
Well, I don't, and I can go back through it historically and get people to understand reality here.
Yeah.
Let's go back in time. I've been doing this for 30 years, more or less. I become a public advocate. I was formerly the founder of Judicial Watch. Now I run Freedom Watch. I was a U.S. prosecutor for the Justice Department, going all the way back. And not since the days of Nixon, which is, of course, when I got my consciousness in terms of corruption and what was going on. By the way, I might add that President Nixon probably comes out as one of our best modern presidents by default. Okay. But nothing has ever happened in terms of holding the higher ups accountable. And why is that? And I've said this before, and I want people to understand reality, is that because you have this situation in Washington, D.C., the swamp, where both political parties are making money hand over fist, where they're amassing tremendous amounts of power, there has been an unwritten agreement, a tacit agreement, that there's mutual assured destruction. Mm-hmm. Go on Fox News, go on CNN, go on MSNBC, go in the Washington Post, the New York Times during the days when we didn't have cable. Say what you have to say. Raise money for your re-election, make yourself popular, use it to try to run for president. But in the end, the establishment protects itself. And the people know that today. And I know that they know it because I have a radio show, Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman, and I echo these themes. I want people to understand that when they watch Sean Hannity on Fox, or when they watch others, and they're promising all these great results, people are going to be indicted, they're going to be thrown in prison. It never happens. Sometimes a lower level official is held to account. But the higher ups, whether you're Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, James Brennan, John Brennan, James Clapper, Comey, the rest of them, no, they walk off in the end because that's the unwritten agreement in Washington, D.C. And you can go throughout history. Look, I fought the Clintons for many years, and I still do. Starting the Judicial Watch, over 40 scandals. I'm the only lawyer ever to have a court rule, that was Judge Royce Lamberth in the District of Columbia, that a sitting president committed a crime, Bill Clinton. But did I put him away? Did Judge Lamberth have the courage to take it a step further? He went farther than any other judge ever has, and I'm thankful. And I think he's a great judge. But it just doesn't happen in Washington, D.C. And that's why we've started citizens' grand juries, because the American people need to take action themselves, peacefully and legally. We need to hold grand juries. We need to indict these criminals. We need to try them. We need to sentence them. We need to seek to have the president, Donald Trump, carry out those sentences, or if he won't do it, to peacefully and legally effect citizens' arrests. But it's not going to happen in government. Now let's get, in particular, get specific with regard to Mr. Durham. If you look at his background, he's a career prosecutor of the Justice Department who came up the line as part of this deep state. Now, whether he's conservative or liberal or moderate doesn't really matter. He's been taught to think as the establishment. If he expects his career to go further than his current job, and he's not that old yet, he cannot gore the ox of any political party or he will go no further. And they know that. So what's happening here? What's happening is that Attorney General Bill Barr, who's done some good things, he's put his foot down with regard to Mueller's investigation. He brought it to a close. But what he's doing is that he's pushing back on the Democrats and those parties on the left for going after him, for making him the whipping boy of Robert Mueller, not finding Russian collusion and not coming up with a definitive answer as to whether there was obstruction of justice, but in fact teeing it up for impeachment by a rabid Democrat House of Representatives. So it's pushback. What they're basically saying is, you want to gore my ox, I'll gore yours. So it's going to be a standoff in the end. And while Durham may come up with some findings, do not expect there to be any high-level indictments. It's not going to happen. Now, I understand how Michael, would be happy about. I love Michael. He's an extremely bright guy, and so is Rush Limbaugh, and so are others. But it's understandable they feel optimism. I would like to feel optimism too, but the optimism that I have is in the American people, in doing it ourselves. And as I've said before, Jason, this is the distinction between Judicial Watch when I founded and ran it, and Judicial Watch today, and what Freedom Watch is today. Freedom Watch does what Judicial Watch used to do when I ran it. Judicial Watch is not run by a lawyer, it's Tom Fitton. So they focus mostly on freedom of information, getting documents. But I am trying to the best I can. I get up every morning thinking what I can do to bring about justice and to return this country to the rule of law and respect for our Constitution. I don't ask the government to do anything. I don't get down on my knees, figuratively speaking, as Fitton does, and plead for them to do something, or others. We have to do it for ourselves. And that's why we're using hard-hitting lawsuits in the vehicle of a citizens' grand jury, more than one, to bring these people to justice. Forget about the government. The government is not going to represent you. It was Ronald Reagan who said the scariest words in the English language are, "Hi, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help you."
Right.
It's not going to happen, Jason, and the people need to understand that. And that's why I get so angry at Hannity, okay, even though I've had experience with Hannity. He's not an ethical person. I've said that many, many times. I've had a lot of run-ins with him over the years in Fox News. But the thing that really bothers me the most is that every night he's boosting ratings, jingling the change for advertising dollars by predicting things as if it's a certainty that are going to happen with regard to justice, and it's not going to happen unless the people rise up and do it for themselves.
Well, Larry, let me point out to everyone that they can actually take a role in the citizens' grand juries by going to freedomwatchusa.org. They can click on the Justice League link here, and they can financially support Freedom Watch by donating tax-deductible funds. And we're still closing in on the date for these grand juries, but I will be there covering it, so people will be able to watch the proceedings. And you've been sharing with me some of the information about how it's going to transpire. So I think people are going to be very interested to see that. So let me take you back, because I think people really value your input, and your comments are sometimes sobering, but I appreciate what you're saying. It doesn't do a lot of good to simply say, TikTok XYZ is going to happen if it's never actually going to happen. Now, last night on More Pain, which is one of the shows that we have on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Michael Moore of True Pundit told us that he had spent the day speaking to people in the DOJ, in the FBI, in the Boston field office, the New Haven field office. Mike's got a lot of contacts into East Coast law enforcement, and he said that he was feeling confident. And don't get me wrong, Michael usually has I don't want to say pessimistic view, but you and he are both two guys who have been to this rodeo before and basically have a good idea how it ends. I think a lot of people might watch you for an hour on Crowdsource the Truth or whatever and just take away your conclusion. But as you and I have gotten to know each other over the past year or two, and we have more conversations about your background, your history, some of the outcomes of some of these cases, it occurs to me that when people haven't seen these outcomes through your eyes, it's very easy to have maybe a false sense of optimism. But on the flip side of that, Larry, I start to think a lot of experts who have been in DC for years would have said Donald Trump had no chance of winning and becoming president. So there is still the possibility that something unexpected might happen. Now, I want to talk to you about two very specific cases that his name is escaping me, John Durham has been involved in the past. And one of them involved the FBI and their use of informants in the Whitey Bulger case. And then I want to contrast that to his investigation of CIA torture and how the outcomes of those things might inform us a bit more about John Durham and what we can expect from him.
Well, that's a good point, and we talked about this earlier in the day before I came on. And one of the things you have to remember that both of those investigations were not seeking to gore the ox of higher up political figures, political appointees. Whitey Bulger was a dual FBI mafia informant. Nobody inside the FBI was indicted or held accountable for collaborating with him. And
but wasn't John Connolly part of the FBI?
Well, which John Connolly are you talking about? Former governor of Texas?
No. There was an FBI agent, and forgive me, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Larry, because we didn't prep for this. And I mean, again, we don't have a script. We're just I'm throwing questions at you. It's my understanding that John Connolly was an FBI agent who arranged this informant situation with Whitey Bulger, and it was Durham who came out pretty hard against Connolly. There was a USA versus Connolly, and then I'm trying to get access to this lecture. I don't know if there's video of it, but Durham gave a lecture at St. Joseph University in Connecticut on the use of informants, a cautionary tale. And he spoke about how John J. Connolly Jr. Utilized Whitey Bulger as an FBI informant and got jammed up, as they say. If it's a case that you're not directly familiar with.
Here's my point. No, I'm not refuting that. What I'm saying is John Connolly was not at the level of a James Comey or a Rod Rosenstein or a John Brennan, former director of the CIA, or James Clapper, former director of national intelligence. People at that level are not prosecuted. They're not held accountable. What I was saying earlier was, Jason, is that people at a middle or low level, sometimes they're burned. They become the sacrificial lamb. Look at what happened during the Valerie Plame scandal during the Bush administration. Dick Cheney was let free, but yet Scooter Libby was indicted for making false testimony before the FBI. He was burned at the stake. He did time. Cheney walked off scot-free. The rest of them walked off scot-free. So this is the way it works in Washington. There'll be some sacrificial lambs.
Right.
But I'm not a pessimist. What I'm trying to say is, and I'm not trying to sell Freedom Watch, and I'm not trying to raise money by making these claims saying give to Freedom Watch, forget about everything else. I'm trying to bring people down to earth because they need to understand, the American people, that we need to rise up ourselves. Our founding fathers did not beg elements of King George III's administration in Great Britain to do their job, the Ministry of Justice. We did it ourselves. So I don't want us to let our guard down on that. And, I understand people are hopeful. If anything happens at all, it won't be for a couple of years in all likelihood. We'll know whether President Trump was reelected or not at that point. That's not the reason for this. But these things move very slowly, and in the end, someone like Mr. Durham, who came up in a conventional way and was made U.S. attorney based on, quote, merit, is not going to be going after higher-ups of either party, because if he does that, his advancement in the future is over.
Right.
It's over.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the other case I wanted to talk about that was a high-profile case that Durham was involved in, and more recent, of course, was this CIA abuse case. This was the torture case, I think, in Abu Ghraib, where the CIA and elsewhere, where they were using waterboarding and enhanced interrogation methods that began under the George W. Bush administration and continued under Barack Obama's administration. We've heard on this program firsthand testimony from John Kiriakou and other former members of the CIA, including Kevin Shipp, who've said that Gina Haspel, now Trump's CIA director, made a special trip, I believe it was to Afghanistan, to observe some of this torture. She's her nickname, of course, is Bloody Gina, which is it's a pretty hardcore nickname. People who are in agreement with you would cite John Durham's relative soft glove approach to the CIA. You and I have spoken about how William Barr came up under George H.W. Bush and seemingly did a lot of defensive maneuvers for the CIA with regard to Iran-Contra. Are we looking at a CIA culture versus FBI culture? Is it possible that Durham is more for the CIA than he is the FBI?
Well, you hit a nail on the head there, Jason, because we know there's this deep intelligence state. We know that it went after the president, went after his family. We know that there's been mass surveillance from Edward Snowden. We know that I got 2 preliminary injunctions in joining that, which gave rise to the USA Freedom Act, and the intelligence agencies and the FBI are still violating the Freedom Act, the USA Freedom Act. They don't obey by any law. But this is one of the reasons why in the deep swamp state of Washington, D.C., is that they don't push too hard, because these agencies and the FBI have stuff on everybody. They have dirt on everybody. And if Durham pushes too high at the higher up level, at the level of a John Brennan or level of a James Clapper, and they still have their loyalists embedded in these agencies, then stuff's going to start flying out of files with him, with regard to him. Now ask yourself this question. Why didn't Bill Barr appoint a special counsel? Why did he go inside the Justice Department? Why did he go to a career prosecutor who basically has had to make people happy and please them and scratch their backs to get his job? Why didn't he appoint a special prosecutor? Now, obviously, I promoted myself to do that. That's not going to happen. I've got 30-some thousand signatures on our website at freedomwatchusa.org. But if it's not Larry Klayman, get somebody else who's fearless, who will let it rip, who's not worried about getting a job or keeping a job inside of the government. You need somebody outside of the government.
There's nobody else like you, though, Larry. That's the problem.
Well, that may be, but maybe we need to clone me. I don't know. For 100
I like that idea. You got to go to South Korea to do that, because W. Bush made human cloning illegal, I believe.
Well, that may be. But in any event, there's got to be somewhere, some way. You know, I laugh. People say I'm not an optimist. If people say I shoot things down. You know what? I believe in UFOs. Okay, Jason. I mean, there are things out there that are unexplained.
Yeah.
And there's bound to be somebody out there that will do the job other than a government prosecutor who has kissed everybody's rear end to get higher up in the scale of things at the Justice Department. The last person I would want as a prosecutor on this is a career Justice Department prosecutor.
So what's the answer? Why did he choose him? There's got to be some legal detail that makes him want a DOJ guy over a special counsel.
Because this is just for show and not for dough. This is to push back on the Democrats. Barr is telling the Democrats, you want to go after me, I can go after you. And it's also with regard to, look at the fallout of this, okay? Lindsey Graham, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, has been prancing around now for weeks, saying that he was going to investigate Steele dossier, Fusion GPS,
right,
the Clinton scandals, right? Now, it came out yesterday that, and it was been reported, that Lindsey Graham is no longer going to do that, because to do that would interfere, quote unquote, with the investigation of Mr. Durham. So now they're shutting down, this is an excuse by Lindsey Graham to shut down his professed investigation of how the Russian collusion of Robert Mueller began. We knew that was going to happen. I predicted that. Lindsey Graham was not going to pursue that for a number of reasons, including the fact that he was the one that told John McCain to give the Steele dossier to the FBI, which started this thing. The other thing is And Lindsey Graham is a nice man, but the reality is Lindsey Graham has been accused to be a closet homosexual. He does not want that out. Okay, and if he pushes too hard, that's going to be flying out of files if that's true. And of that generation, it's no longer a crime or it's not even negative to be gay anymore. People accept it, live your own life. But for Lindsey Graham, that generation, you don't want it out.
Well,
So
let me counter that, Larry, because I think there might be even more reasons why Lindsey Graham, being gay in this day and age, that frankly might even help him gain votes in certain circumstances. My feeling is Lindsey Graham might be more concerned about some of the things he was involved in with his buddy John McCain with regard to Libya and Benghazi, and that brings us back to this CIA nexus. To what extent are people like John McCain, he was part of the, what different Senate committees was he on? The Armed Services Committee, the Intelligence Committee, so many different committees that are interfacing with the intelligence agencies. And here's his little, junior buddy, Lindsey Graham, who's given out awards to people that the Moriartys tell us are actual terrorists. He was aware of and potentially complicit with the blatant and wanton destruction of Libya, a sovereign nation. And, perhaps these guys are worried that if Donald Trump starts stirring up the hornet's nest, all of these things are going to spin out of control. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm just trying to, dismantle it.
No, I agree with you. And I just gave one example, okay?
Yeah.
There's obviously other stuff. He's been on intelligence committees, defense committees. He's never seen a war that he doesn't like. Lindsey Graham loves them all, wants to fight everybody at the same time, just like McCain, and so, he's got skeletons. Everybody has skeletons up there, okay? Everybody in this country has skeletons. The question is, to what degree do you have skeletons? These people are not willing to risk it because they're politicians. They don't want this stuff flying out of files.
Well, and I think even without skeletons, if anything, this Russia investigation shows us that if they can't find sufficient skeletons on you, they just make something up and put it out there and get you bogged down in a legal case or, ruin your public reputation so that you're basically incapacitated, even if you haven't done anything wrong.
That's right. People get smeared. Look at my client and friend, Judge Roy Moore. He countersued these women down there in Alabama, and they don't even want to testify. They don't want to go under oath. He's now favored if he decides to run for the Senate to win overwhelmingly in Alabama, because the American people and the people of Alabama smell a rat, and they're starting to understand that. And I want the American people to know that our government is a giant rat, okay, in effect. It's a rat's nest in Washington, D.C. This is a game. It's reality TV. It's not reality for reality's sake. And that's why I keep saying we, the American people, need to rise up ourselves peacefully and legally and do it for ourselves, not to go on Fox News and say, hey, look at all these documents I got. Aren't this great? We got a new scandal, whether it's Tom Fitton or Sarah Carter or others on Hannity or whoever. Gee, it's great. We have a new scandal. This is really fun. I get to be on TV. But the reality is, what are you going to do with those documents? How are you going to bring about justice? And the American people need to do it for themselves. We give them a vehicle with Freedom Watch to try to do that. And I'm never going to give up to the day I die to try to bring about justice and try to restore the rule of law to this country, because we're headed down the drain as it currently is. And it's great. We can all feel optimistic about Mr. Durham. But people should know, don't rock back in your chair and let him do the job that we have to do for ourselves, because he's not going to do that job in the end in terms of holding the Clintons, the Obamas, the Clappers, the Brennans, the Comeys, the Lovebirds, the rest of them accountable. Because if he does, his career is effectively over. And look at what happened historically with Ken Starr. I believe that you can indict a sitting president. My former good friend, may his soul rest in peace, Ronald Rotunda, perhaps the premier ethics and constitutional expert in this country, did a paper when he was working in the Watergate Committee many years ago. I was a young staffer for Senator Richard Schweiker at the time, saying the presidents can be indicted. No president's ever been indicted. Why is that? Because to indict a president is to cut your own head off, okay, in terms of the backlash that can happen. And other countries have. They've held their leaders accountable, Israel, Brazil, others. We have not. And this country is run by a bunch of politicians, as I said earlier, who in the end will protect themselves. And this has become a dog and pony show, a game. And, frankly, I'm sickened by it. I feel like throwing up half the time. I turn the cable TV off, but I get up every single morning, Jason. I can't say this enough, thinking, what can we do to bring about the rule of law and respect for the Constitution? What can we do to save this country when we have these criminals running our government? Whether it's what happened to the Bundys or Schaefer Cox or what they attempted with Jerry Corsi, with the special counsel. These people are, excuse the French, scum, absolute scum.
Yeah.
And these are the people in control of our country, and they're leading us down the primrose path to destruction.
And I think everybody watching appreciates you for doing that, Larry. I just want to make sure this is Professor Rotunda who I'm showing, right?
Yes, Ron was a very great man, and he unexpectedly died about a year ago, went in for a hernia operation and came out dead.
Oh, my God.
And he was a very courageous, very honest guy, and one of the few ethics experts in this country who was a conservative. Most of them are all radical leftists. You can see the ethics complaints being filed these days against conservatives. Very few are filed against leftists, because these bar associations are run by people that donate heavily to the Democratic Party.
Now, Larry, I want to ask you some questions. We may touch on some things that you can't speak about, and just let me know if that's the case. Obviously, attorney-client privilege is going to dictate, but your name came up on Monday when some of this reporting initially came out, talking about one of your former clients, this thing, the Hammer. How does all that play into, this was a Comey, Clapper, Brennan, Mueller kind of a thing. Can you say anything about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I can say that former client, and he asked that I not refer to him publicly anymore, does not want to be involved in anything with regard to mass surveillance or further investigations, because I made an effort to get an investigation of this, and it was brushed aside. So frankly, he's fed up, and I have to obey a client's wishes. And I've told those people, do not involve me in any discussion of what occurred in the past, because as a lawyer, I have an obligation to that client to obey his wishes. But I can talk generally, okay, about the mass surveillance state in this country. Everybody knows about it. They've seen what's happened with regard to the president himself. And anybody who's challenged this government has had his confidential information obtained without probable cause by the CIA, by the FBI, by the Director of National Intelligence, and by other agencies. And it is Orwellian in scope. I obtained for myself and for two other clients, not this one we're talking about, preliminary injunctions against Obama's deep state national security agency going back to 2013 and 2014. And the judge, Richard Leon at the time, who I believe the deep state has gotten to him, since then, ruled that it was almost Orwellian. It was a police state. I take my hat off to Judge Leon for making those early rulings, but frankly, later on, he bailed out. I think they got something on him. I had information that, in fact, they did, and he just took an exit stage left. And that's how powerful this stuff is. They can destroy you.
He literally did that the last time I saw you in court, if I'm not mistaken. He was the guy with that really ornate lamp on his desk, and he sort of called you in for a hearing, said two things, and then literally ran out of the room.
Yeah, I was trying to get him to understand what the issue was, and he just walked off the bench. I mean, his lamp looked like he was conducting a seance, and perhaps it was.
Yeah. That was Dr. Corsi's hearing, wasn't it?
Yes. I mean, I had the case originally assigned to him as related. He didn't want it. It was a hot potato. And these two preliminary injunctions that I got later were vacated, although they did give rise to the USA Freedom Act, which, if enforced, would actually have been good. It meant that the telephone companies could not get your data automatically from Verizon and from Sprint and T-Mobile and otherwise, unless they had some kind of a warrant or certification that there was probable cause that a crime was being committed or communications with terrorists. But the agencies are still disobeying that. And interestingly enough, Leon wouldn't let those cases continue on. It was really unexpected that he bailed out. And I had cases specifically against John Brennan, James Clapper, and others who I had learned had participated in this illegal surveillance. And even with the USA Freedom Act, those cases should have continued on for monetary damages under what's called the Bivens principle, which when federal officials violate the constitutional rights of American citizens, if there's no other adequate remedy at law, you can hold them personally accountable for large damages. And Leon just ran away from those cases. I asked him if he had had any ex parte communications with the intelligence agencies or the FBI. He refused to respond. He simply said, Klayman's making a conspiracy theory, but that was a non-denial denial. And he just walked off the case, merrily into his senior status as a judge. And I'm thankful for what he did with the 2 preliminary injunctions, but something spooked him, something scared him. And I believe they went to him and they blackmailed him into backing off. I also believe that how do you explain the inexplicable 12th hour flip of our Chief Justice John Roberts, who has become a liberal in recent days? In fact, we know that, in the last few days that Alabama, Georgia, and other states are coming up with very tough anti-abortion laws to go to the Supreme Court. Don't be surprised if Roberts votes with the liberals and upholds Roe v. Wade. They've got something, I believe, on Roberts. And that's what caused him to flip at the last minute on Obamacare, inexplicably, which gave rise to, significant damage against our economy, which we're still trying to recover from. So this is the nature of things in Washington, D.C. And this kind of intelligence state has been used throughout world history, whether it's by our intelligence agencies, the KGB, or other intelligence agencies, to coerce, intimidate, and blackmail public officials into doing what you want them to do. And it's very, very dangerous.
Yeah. Indeed. And Larry, I selected this image of Gina Haspel getting sworn in as the CIA director because I found it interesting, the expression on Donald Trump's face. I've composited you and John Durham into the image, but this is the original image with Gina Haspel and Donald Trump. Doesn't look as enthusiastic as he usually does about his appointment of Gina Haspel. I think a lot of people are curious to what extent Donald Trump is controlling the government as president versus how the government is controlling Donald Trump as president.
Jason, I really love the president. Okay, I mean, he can say some things every now and then that he could think through a little bit better, but at least he says what he thinks. First president in our lifetime.
Yeah.
With the exception, perhaps, of Ronald Reagan, who I loved as well, who actually speaks to the American people in a truthful manner. But the problem is that he's beholden because he's under siege in every way, whether it was with the witch hunt or whether now his family's being harassed on Capitol Hill. They want his tax returns. You name it, the guy's under siege constantly. Plus, he's having to deal with major crises in North Korea, Iran, and Venezuela.
Yeah.
So he relies on the advice of others. And who did he rely on for a lot of these appointments? The traitor Don McGahn, the White House counsel who testified behind Trump's back for 30 hours to Special Counsel Robert Mueller and implicated the president in alleged obstruction of justice. This guy's an establishment Republican. He's a hack. And he's the reason why a lot of these Trump judges that are on the bench, including Justice Kavanaugh, are not what they're cracked up to be, to put it mildly. I've appeared in front of 2 or 3 of them already, and they're not much better than the Obama and Clinton judges. They're scared of their shadow. Maybe they're not ultra-leftists, but they're not willing to stick their neck out on behalf of the American people, or for that matter, any other matter that could cost them in getting a higher appointment to the District of Columbia Circuit Court of Appeals or any other court.
Larry, talk to us for a minute about this violation that Don McGahn, this is a violation of attorney-client privilege. It's a violation of the confidence of the president. How egregious is
it? Was a violation of executive privilege. I can't believe that anybody inside the White House, including the president himself, gave McGahn authority to talk about communications with the president. Now, McGahn was White House counsel. He was not personal counsel to Donald Trump, but he has executive privilege to protect, and he didn't. Now, to the extent that anyone said or recommended to the president that that should happen, God forbid it was Jay Sekulow or it was Rudy Giuliani, because that would be major malpractice on their part, it created a real problem. And now the Democrats, run by Gerald Nadler and Adam Schiff and people like Eric Swalwell, who has to be the dumbest white guy in the Senate. I mean, it's just in the House. I mean, it's unbelievable. This guy is so stupid. These people are beating up on Donald Trump based upon what McGahn testified to in front of Special Counsel Robert Mueller. It was all executive privilege. He stabbed the president in the back. And then when the current White House counsel went back to McGahn and said, well, would you please make a statement that you didn't think the president had obstructed justice? He refused because he's saving his own skin. He's saving his own future career prospects. I think the guy is despicable.
Wow.
And if anybody should be called in front of the bar, it's McGahn, because he sold the president out and he violated executive privilege in all likelihood.
You mean the Bar Association, not William Barr, of course.
Not maybe you should go to a bar and repent. I don't.
Speaking of going to a bar, you mentioned Robert Mueller, and of course we can't have an investigation into the origins of the Russia probe without somehow investigating Robert Mueller. I think we can surmise from your previous comments that despite ordering the world's most expensive nothing burger, as we've discussed in the past, you would probably presume that Robert Mueller is in no danger whatsoever.
No danger. A man of great integrity. Robert Mueller was director of the FBI. He's got stuff on everybody, just like Brennan and Clapper and the rest of the deep state characters. Okay, so forget about that one. Okay, he'll just walk off scot-free. But this is why what Jerry Corsi is doing is so important. I brought a lawsuit against Mueller for Dr. Corsi for violating grand jury secrecy for the illegal surveillance that was occurring with regard to Dr. Corsi and other crimes. That's going through the courts. That's a Bivens action. We're holding Mueller personally accountable for that. And Jerry Corsi also brought criminal complaints at the Justice Department with the Office of Professional Responsibility and Inspector General. I filed that. Of course, that's likely to go nowhere. But this court case, we can control. And that's what I'm saying, is that we do have the power ourselves at Freedom Watch on behalf of the American people and Dr. Corsi to peacefully and legally take matters into our own hands. Don't rock back and think that Robert Durham is going to do our job. We're doing it for ourselves. Dr. Corsi is a hero. He stuck his neck out. He said, I'm not going to lie under oath, even if you offer me a sweetheart plea agreement, Robert Mueller, to implicate the president in crimes that he didn't commit. And of course, we know that Corsi was not indicted for lying. Roger Stone was. Corsi did not threaten witnesses. Roger Stone did. Corsi played it straight, and that's why he wasn't indicted. And now he's fighting back, and he's risking the wrath of this deep state establishment to do what he thinks is right. Now, Corsi's the real hero here, not some government U.S. attorney who people are putting all their hopes in. Don't put your hope in that. I mean, let's hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Right. As we say, and planning for the worst means the American people have to rise up themselves.
Now, it seems that the investigation, although it was just announced the other day, the Durham investigation, it seems that it's been going on for some time. There was some testimony. I'm looking for the article here because there was some back and forth with Jim Jordan, and it was mentioned that John Durham had already begun investigating this. Do we know anything about, here it is, this executive, this committee here, Judiciary Committee, they were speaking quite a bit about Durham. This is from July of this year. So Jim Jordan and Mr. Levin are talking about John Durham investigating. Jordan initially confuses this with the investigation that's happening from Huber. I presume you don't have much hope for that one either.
No, I mean, past this prologue, what's happened with that? That's been going on, what, for 3 or 4 years? Or maybe 2.5 at least. Nothing happened out of that. The prosecutor in Utah, that was what Jeff Sessions did. He passed it off to a U.S. attorney to take the heat off him. And that's exactly what Bill Barr is doing. But Bill Barr is doing it, again, to keep the Democrats off his back and to keep himself from getting impeached. What he's saying is, hey, you want to go after me? I'm going to have the goods on you to go after you. But if he pulls the trigger and actually does anything, then the Democrats will go after him. So it's kind of like the U.S. and Russia. We both have nuclear-tipped missiles, but we hope never to have to use them against each other. But if one of us uses them, you can expect the other to be annihilated. That's what the game is in Washington. It's been the game for a very, very long time. And Jason, what's really interesting is, when I do my radio show, as I said, every week, it's broadcast on 44 stations nationally, and you can get it a podcast at freedomwatchusa.org or go to radioamerica.com. I am very critical. I say these things. And if you look at the likes versus the dislikes, go to our YouTube channel, Freedom Watch's YouTube channel, you'll see that 97.5% approximately people are hitting like. Only 2.5% are saying they don't like what I'm saying. The American people are starting to understand that all this hype, excuse the French, is a bunch of shit. That's what it is. And they're fed up, and they watch Fox News and they listen to these other entities because they have no choice. I turn on Fox News too. I turn on CNN. I turn on MSNBC. I want to see what the other side's saying. But do I believe what's being spewed forth? No, I don't believe in terms of there being justice in the end.
Yeah.
I don't believe that, and that's why I do what I do.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to maintain an optimistic outlook. I mean, the thing is, it's hard to disagree with anything that you're saying. I'm holding out hope that perhaps there's some sort of, Boston, Connecticut, New England rivalry going on, and maybe this is some bad blood between some old hats in the Department of Justice. It looks like some of your subscribers are coming back up on the Freedom Watch YouTube channel. People can find that on youtube.com. Just search for Freedom Watch. It's a good way to listen to Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. You're posting all those shows on there, and you also post a lot of the videos that we do together so people can follow what you're doing on there. You're very involved, Larry, in a lot of these suits that are going on against the social media companies, and I know that's not at all related to John Durham, but do we want to touch on any of those topics?
Well, you can see that we've brought antitrust lawsuits against all the major social media companies. That's a judge that, believe it or not, was appointed by Trump, and he was afraid of it. He dismissed it without prejudice. It means it can be brought again. We're going to be refiling it in Florida, but I also took it up on appeal. We're also going to bring in a lawsuit on behalf of Laura Loomer, who was defamed by Twitter and others. Once that came out, Facebook rather, they called her dangerous. That is libelous. She's not dangerous. She's peaceful. She makes a point, with some of her, demonstrations and such. And then NPR jumped on and called her a white supremacist. It's all over the internet. These people are going to be sued. The cases that I brought for Sheriff Arpaio in front of a very fine judge in Washington, D.C., Royce Lamberth, who I made reference to, I'm hopeful that we'll go to a jury in that and get a large jury verdict. We brought cases against the New York Times for Arpaio. I brought cases for Corsi for defamation and slander against the Washington Post and its owner, leftist owner Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon. Again, we're doing the heavy lifting. There have been a few random lawsuits against the media, but we have a leftist media strike force which is going all out to hold the left accountable. And I also hold the right accountable. I've sued Fox News and Suzanne Scott, the CEO, for defaming my client Laurie Loon when she said that she never knew of Ailes' sexual abuse against my client and the other women, which was a lie. And Laurie Loon, who was so severely damaged by Roger Ailes, to this day has PTSD, has thought about taking her own life. That's how bad she was damaged. And for the CEO of Fox News to say they didn't know what was going on when they were the right-hand person of Roger Ailes and was rewarded with his job when he had to resign in disgrace is absolutely a disgrace in and of itself. That's Suzanne Scott, and she runs Fox News, and she's the one who's moving Fox News to the left. Because she's doing the wishes of the Murdoch brothers, who are. We should
also mention that Laurie Loon was employed at Fox News. So in this, Me Too era right now. It's really shocking to hear how other women, her co-workers there, are not coming to her defense.
Well, that's right, because they're afraid. Fox News is very wealthy today. I mean, I helped, along with Matt Drudge and Ann Coulter and others, build the audience. I mean, the cases we were bringing and the writings of Ann Coulter and the blog of Drudge and others, we helped build that network, ironically. But Fox News, has become extremely, extremely wealthy, and these hosts are very well paid. They don't want to rock the boat. The employees don't want to rock the boat. They knew what Roger Ailes was doing. They knew how he had severely sexually abused Laurie Loon and subjected her to emotional torture. And the irony here is that Gretchen Carlson eventually came forward and broke this whole thing wide open. What happened to her was child's play compared to what happened to Laurie Loon. And who was Laurie Loon's handler for Roger Ailes? The current CEO of Fox News, Suzanne Scott, a woman. So why was she put in as CEO after Ailes had to resign? Well, they needed a woman for cover, and they needed someone to keep the female bodies buried. And that's why she's there. And that's one thing to do all of that, but then to give an interview to the LA Times and say, I knew nothing about this. This is like the Germans in Munich during World War II saying they didn't know that Jews, gypsies, and retarded people were being killed at Dachau. It was right in the middle of the city. So, this is Fox News. It's not a reputable organization. It's not an ethical organization. And I sued that as well as the leftist media because they all need to be held accountable.
And Larry, I've always said it doesn't matter with these, giant news organizations if they are on the left or on the right. When they're, as you point out, when they're owned by millionaires or billionaires and financed by advertising. There's a lot of people who tell me, Larry, oh, I should just make all the shows free on YouTube and rely on advertising. But then it allows the advertisers and the facilitators of that advertising, in this case Google, to control the nature of the content and to control what we say. This is why it's so important for people to go to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. And for whether it's $2 a month, $5 a month, that small financial sponsorship by individuals removes this undue financial influence. It's also very important for people to go to freedomwatchusa.org and support the work that you and your team are doing there. People can click on the red donate button to financially support the work of Freedom Watch. And of course, if people contribute more than $250, Larry's going to send you a 4-volume set of books that he's written that tell you all about his times there in Washington, D.C. at the Department of Justice, give you some real depth and insight into the inner workings of the swamp. So, Larry, what else is going on that you want to share with our viewers here? We're going to have to wait and see what happens with John Durham and his investigation.
Well, just in the last 2 days, Jason, again, I'm not just asking for documents, I'm bringing hard-hitting legal cases. We filed a lawsuit in Washington, D.C. federal court to force the Department of Homeland Security to investigate Representative Ilham Omar for immigration fraud and cavorting around with terrorist-related groups. Because we believe, and our good friend Laura Loomer helped break this initially, that she committed immigration fraud when she married her brother to get her brother American citizenship. And as a representative of the U.S. Congress, for her to be hanging out with terrorist-related groups like CARE, which was an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation criminal prosecution in Dallas years ago, is unacceptable. So at least there needs to be an investigation. And we said if you find that what we said in our petition is true, make a criminal referral to the Justice Department and deport her. So we're asking for an administrative hearing on all these matters, and it needs to be addressed. Then yesterday, I filed a brief for Sheriff Joe Arpaio at the Ninth Circuit because these clowns, and that's the nicest way you can say they are, Gerald Nadler, Eric Swalwell, and 18 other Democrats filed this ridiculous brief at the Ninth Circuit telling the court that the pardon of Sheriff Arpaio should be set aside, that the case should be remanded to the lower court judge, in Arizona, and that Sheriff Arpaio should be imprisoned for misdemeanor of allegedly profiling neighborhoods where there were illegal aliens. I might add, where are you going to look for illegal aliens if it isn't at a day worker site? I might add. So, but that's neither here nor there. The bottom line is these people put forward a false argument to the Ninth Circuit for political purposes by making Sheriff Arpaio, America's sheriff, my good friend, a patriot, a whipping boy. They want to get to President Trump over his policies against illegal immigration. And I asked the Ninth Circuit to sanction Nadler and the rest of them for filing a frivolous brief. So I did that yesterday.
It's amazing the political moves that everybody's making, Larry. I mean, it's they don't seem to care about putting in false statements. You've got it listed in the cases section here on freedomwatchusa.org. People can read all about it. They can look at the filed amici opposition. There's a lot that people can learn about the law. You and I have had these conversations in the past that, you know, the law, it's almost like the rules of poker, but being a good poker player requires really understanding the game, your opponents, making the right moves. It's not just about what hand beats another hand or what law is the law. I mean, all these different guys seem totally impervious to prosecution.
Well, that's right. And, you know, we talk about it a lot, Jason. You're my very good friend. And I might add at that point, you know, please support Crowdsource the Truth and Jason, because he tells the truth and he lets me tell the truth. And the time you spend listening to his shows is 1,000-fold more important than listening to Fox News, because you're getting it unvarnished without the political correctness. Jason's not in it for the money. He needs the money to exist. But he's doing it because he loves this country and he wants people to understand the truth. So that's really important. And the truth here is that our justice system is only as good as the judge you draw in any particular case. And it's only as good as the lawyer that you have representing you in that regard. And that's what really offended me and caused me to start Judicial Watch, the name Judicial Watch, is because the judges that we have, they're generally speaking politicians in robes. They were picked through political patronage. They scratched the backs of the people that put them in power. 90% of them in a political case that has, you know, some kind of political ramification, you can gauge with almost exact certainty how they're going to rule just based on what president appointed them to the bench. And that government should not be run by judges like that. And I've always said, if the revolution breaks out, I mean this figuratively, not actually, but the first to be taken to the guillotines are the judges, because they have the ability to do the most good for our country, but they have become a real danger for this country. Because by and large, when you get into these kinds of cases, you've got a bunch of political hacks making decisions on behalf of the American people. So that people have said to me, Jason, why do you file so many cases, Larry? I said, because, you know, we're like a MERV missile. If 1 in 10 get through, we're doing really well.
Larry, what could the people do collectively? And I don't know, maybe Freedom Watch could, I know you're so busy, you're overwhelmed with all this stuff, but what could we do about somehow reforming the judicial system? I mean, it seems like these judges should be voted for by the citizens, not appointed by presidents. We've got to eliminate some of this politicization, and we've got to have the judges beholden to the people.
You're right. I used to think that the appointment system was better, but no, it's a rigged system. It's greased. Okay. But what we can do in the federal system, where you do have appointments, I had a 5-part plan that I was advocating when I ran for the U.S. Senate in Florida. Number 1, have merits panels that pick them on the basis of merit. Number 2, make them go to judge school before they become judges, so they understand how to analyze an issue. Right now, we pick judges out of private practice, out of government, out of corporations. It's like Dr. Strangelove, you know. Yeah. You know, they're raising their arm instinctively to how they were trained. They're not trained properly. In Europe, you go a separate track to become a judge. I'm not saying the European system's better. They have their problems. Third, limited liability. If they make a grossly negligent or reckless decision, get insurance companies to insure the litigants, because a lot of times, and in most instances, litigants parties don't have the money to take an appeal. You know, to go to the Supreme Court costs you thousands of dollars just to have the brief printed in the way they want it. Ordinary people can't afford that. Thirdly, term limits. not for life. The
Yeah.
founding fathers were enlightened, but they made some mistakes. 2 4-year terms renewable for good behavior. Otherwise, take an exit stage left. And then 5, psychological counseling. Because frankly, a lot of these judges are imbalanced that are on the court. They have a bad fight with their wife in the morning or their husband. They're going to take it out on you. They don't know how to handle these things. So those are the recommendations that I've made. But you're right. The system of electing judges I've come to believe is better because at least you can get rid of them if you've got a bad judge. Right. Otherwise, these federal judges, it's like herpes. They're there forever.
Exactly. Now, Larry, in our last couple minutes, I just want to share with you some questions from the comments coming from YouTube here. We've got Agent 99 asking, Larry, do you know that you were mentioned in James Baker's testimony, the FBI former attorney, back in October 2018 with regards to 47 hard drives with mass surveillance of Americans?
I knew of that. And that's the issue I don't want to get into specifically, but I actually had a conversation with Representative Meadows about that, and he advised me of that. And that particular investigation, Baker admitted, was buried by Comey and himself and the FBI. So Mark Meadows, I actually had a conversation with him at the time. I might add, I get the impression Meadows is a good guy, so is Jim Jordan, but they're lone wolves in the House of Representatives, and they have no power, and basically they've been relegated to going on Fox News and explaining what they've got, but nothing ever happens, and that's the problem, and that's why we have to do it ourselves. The American people need to do it ourselves.
And wasn't there even some texting going on with Peter Strzok talking about you?
Well, Peter Strzok, I think, said that what I was doing was bullshit. So I think that was the phrase. Yeah, I mean, we've caught their attention. I've always caught their attention. But again, I don't ask them to do our job, and it's for us to do it. These people are going to be brought before our citizens' grand juries. Everybody from Comey to Mueller to the Clintons to the Obamas to the Clappers to the Brennans to the Rosensteins to the Lovebirds, they're all going to be indicted. They're going to be tried. We're going to be starting very shortly in the next few weeks. And this is something that needs to be done. The American people need to do it. Justice Scalia said the grand jury belongs to the American people, not the 3 branches of government. As I've said before, we didn't even have a Justice Department up to 1870. Take a look at a column I wrote last week for WorldNet Daily. I have it up on our website. I embedded a trailer from the movie Wyatt Earp, with Kevin Costner. And there's a trailer. It's really telling. And I advocate peaceful and legal means. But what really appeals to me about it is that Wyatt Earp, who was a very strong marshal in the Old West, had to break the law to enforce the law. That's how wild it was. And as a young boy, his father said to him, he said, Wyatt, I want you to understand something. There's some really dangerous people in this world. And what's most important is your family. Keep your family close. And what's important after that, the only thing that's important, is the law. His father was a judge. And then he added, he said, when you encounter these very dangerous people, shoot first and shoot to kill. Now, I'm not advocating that. I don't want to harm anybody. I don't want anybody to harm anybody. But what we have to do is to take these criminals out peacefully and legally before they destroy our country, and take a lesson from Wyatt Earp in the modern context. And we need to do it ourselves. And that's why we offer a vehicle at Freedom Watch to do that, by supporting our cases and our citizens' grand juries and anything else I can think of to try to bring about justice. And I welcome the views of our listeners and our supporters. Give me an idea. If you have something that you think is going to be helpful, we may want to pursue it. Right now, we're really small. We need to grow. We need to be bigger. I need to hire more people. I need to have more reach. We're very small. We're very lean. But we need to rise up, the American people. We can't depend on a John Durham. We can't depend on a John Hoover. We can't depend on a Attorney General Bill Barr. They are the establishment. The establishment is what created the situation that we're in today. And while Bill Barr has done some good things by putting an end to the Mueller investigation, The reality is, don't expect there to be much blowback on the Democrats. It's not going to happen. And with regard to Lindsey Graham, you can just forget it completely.
Well, I mean, I can't argue with what you're saying, Larry. It makes good sense, but I'm going to hold out hope that perhaps something unprecedented will happen. Agent 99 is remarking again that she found it odd that James Baker brought up this matter of the hard drives on his own. It had nothing to do with what he was being questioned about.
Well, he was questioned by Mark Meadows about it, I understood at the time. And this is something, if the client ever gives me permission to talk about it further, I will. I'm still a lawyer. I was a private lawyer, so I have to obey his wishes. But the reality is that inside the FBI has all the information with regard to mass surveillance, with regard to the crimes of John Brennan, of James Clapper, of James Comey, of James Baker, the rest of them. They have it all there. So this criticism of Christopher Wray in the last few days by the president is quite well taken, the former FBI director. He's another deep state establishment individual who's scared of his shadow.
Wait, he's criticizing Christopher Wray, or he's criticizing Comey?
Well, he was criticizing Comey and Wray.
Oh, so Wray is the current guy, not the former.
No, I mean, Wray said the other day that he didn't think there was any spying. I mean, the guy is he's a spineless establishment hack, and the president said that, and the president's absolutely right. And this is an example of how bad appointees have been given to the president. He signed off on false pretenses, and these people are in the government right now, and they're not helping him or helping the American people. In fact, what they're doing is contrary to the interests of the American people.
Absolutely. Well, Larry, I want to thank you for joining me again tonight. People who want to learn more about your time in the Department of Justice and kind of cutting your teeth there, figuring out the swamp, can purchase your book, Whores, Why and How I Came to Fight the Establishment. If you don't want to send money to a CIA-controlled retailer like Amazon.com, you can go on to freedomwatchusa.org and you can financially support their effort there. For people who send more than $250, which is a tax-deductible donation, you're going to receive the 4-volume series that includes Larry's book, Whores, and you're going to have the satisfaction of knowing that you are helping the one law firm and the one lawyer in the country that is actually seeking justice, at least the one that I'm aware of. Larry, I got to thank you. It's always great having you on the show.
Thanks, Jason. God bless you.
And you.
Thank to all your listeners. I really appreciate the input.
Absolutely. And I want to encourage everyone to go to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. You can also see last night's episode of More Pain at patreon.com/truepundit. Michael shared a lot of insights. I think people are going to find it very informative to compare what Larry has just told us to what Michael has told us, and we're certainly going to keep a close eye on this situation as the investigation develops over the coming weeks. Larry will be back to share his insights with us as the situation develops. Larry, thanks very much. Have a great night.
You're welcome, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks for watching, everybody.